Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to look at the long shadow that history can cast on education, and how systems that were built for exclusion can echo for generations.
So at first glance, this question seems a little absurd, right? I mean, Soviet Russia and apartheid South Africa were basically polar opposites in what they believed. But if you dig into one very specific area, how they treated children with disabilities, you start to see this stunning and frankly pretty troubling parallel emerge.
So what we're looking at here comes from a really fascinating study that put these two infamous regimes side by side. And what it found reveals something profound, not just about history, but about how deeply a society's core beliefs can get baked into its most basic institutions, like its schools.
Okay, so to really get why they acted the way they did, we have to start with what they actually believed. For both of these regimes, education was never just about teaching kids to read and write. No, it was a tool, a direct reflection of their biggest political goals. And this is really the core of it. In Russia, it was all about class. They called it proletarian humanism, which sounds nice, but the goal was to forge this perfect, ideal new Soviet person. Then you have South Africa, where it was all about race, maintaining a strict, segregated hierarchy. So you've got these completely different endgames, but for both, education was the #1 tool to make their worldview stick. And that brings us to a really crucial point. Ideology, in this context, it isn't just a bunch of abstract ideas. It's a practical system. It's the blueprint that justifies control, that justifies oppression, and that gives the state the power to decide who belongs and who gets left out. So with these ideologies as their foundation, both regimes then had to answer a really critical question, and the answer would define their special education systems for decades to come.
They had to draw a line in the sand, a clear, official line. They had to decide who was considered educable, who could be molded to fit into their vision for society.
And that one single label, uneducable, well, it basically became a life sentence.
In Soviet Russia, this sorting happened under the banner of this pseudoscience called defectology. It sounded very official, very scientific, right? But what it really did was create this incredibly rigid, segregated system of special schools, all based on a child's so-called defects and whether they'd be useful to the state.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, they didn't even need to invent a new science. The apartheid government just took the school system that was already there and already racially segregated and basically weaponized it. They made sure that special education resources went overwhelmingly to white kids, all while reinforcing the state's ideology of separation. But look, this isn't just some dusty history lesson. This stuff isn't just a footnote in a textbook. The decisions these regimes made have real, tangible consequences that you can literally see in the data today. And the numbers coming out of post-apartheid South Africa are especially eye-opening. They give us this really clear window into just how deep and how lasting this kind of impact truly is. Take a look at this chart. It shows why kids are out of school in South Africa today. And look at that. Disability is a major reason, right up there with things like not being able to afford school fees. Decades later, the legacy of that old system is still failing these kids. And the numbers, they are just incredibly stark. A full 26% of South African youth with disabilities between the ages of 16 and 18 are not in any school or training program. Now compare that to just 7% of their peers without disabilities. That is a massive, massive gap. You can see the effect so clearly in this table. Look at age 12. Almost 99% of kids are in school. That's fantastic. But then, look what happens by age 18. Attendance just drops off a cliff down to just over half. And for children with disabilities, that drop-off is even steeper. It shows just how hard it is for the system to keep them engaged as they get older.
So what is going on here? Why is it so incredibly hard to move to a more inclusive system in places like South Africa and post-Soviet Russia, even decades after these regimes are gone?
Well, the research points to these really deep, stubborn roots of the old system. It's the buildings themselves, the segregated schools that are still standing. It's the institutional memory, how generations of teachers were trained to think. And it's the social attitudes about who's normal. All of this stuff carries that toxic legacy forward. Honestly, the best analogy is thinking about it like this. A regime can fall, and you can pass all the new laws you want, but the original ideological software, those fundamental beliefs about who is valuable and who isn't, can keep running on the hardware of the country's institutions for generations. And that leaves us with a really tough, provocative final question. When a system is designed from the ground up not to educate everyone, but to sort and to exclude people, is just reforming it enough? What does it actually take to dismantle a system that was built not to lift all children up, but to sort them out?